and the role of Gaza in the current experimental juncture will be the topic about which Ms. Mary Kaldor will be speaking. Ms. Kaldor, do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much.
I hope you can hear me. Hello, my name is Mary Kaldor. I'm Professor Emeritus of Global Governance at the London School of Economics in Britain. And I suppose what I want to say in my evidence is along the lines of the last speaker's idea of chinks of life. The Gaza People's Tribunal can be viewed as part of a worldwide social movement committed to drawing attention to the ongoing tragedy that has been described so vividly that is being inflicted on the Palestinian people. According to the Armed Conflict Vacation and Events data, some 48,000 demonstrations were held between 7th of October 2023 and 25th of September 2024 in 137 countries, and the vast majority, 99%, were peaceful. The scale of the protests has continued since then. This movement, and I think it's incredibly important, involves the process of constructing, strengthening, and spreading international norms relating to war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, apartheid, and the crime of famine. A whole new generation is learning and teaching others about the salience of global human rights and the extent to which international institutions act really does depend on global public opinion. I use the term experimental juncture to describe turbulent periods in history when political institutions are out of kilter with far-reaching economic, social, and technological change. It's similar to what the Italian Marxist Gramsci called the interregnum, when the old is dying and the new cannot be born. What Gramsci called morbid symptoms include the wars in Palestine, Ukraine, and Sudan, the harsh treatment of refugees and asylum seekers, the rise of or return of racism, Islamophobia, or anti-Semitism, the failure to deal with the floods, fires, and droughts associated with climate change, or the crimes associated with extreme inequality, the spread of disease, or financial recklessness. The reason I use the term experimental juncture is to draw attention to the role of political agency. Experimental junctures are crises of political authority. They're existential moments when the political class has to act, but they don't know how to. So they draw on ideas prevalent in society, and some of these ideas are truly terrible and make things worse, like killing Jews, gypsies, and homosexuals, or invading other countries in the 20th century. It's only when politicians adopt or are forced to compromise over some of the better ideas that some sort of consensual narrative is re-established, giving birth to the new. The adoption of those ideas can be described as social innovation, and what it involves is the institutionalization of social movements. Institutionalization means that part of the agenda is adopted by the political authority and that the movements or parts of the movement get transformed into formal institutions, such as political parties, trades unions, or NGOs. Institutionalization is always an imperfect compromise and often involves the marginalization of more radical groups or movements. In the past, experimental junctures were associated with major hegemonic wars. The last great experimental juncture lasted from 1914 to 1945 and included two devastating world wars in which something of the order of 70 million people were killed. Both decolonization and the welfare state, and I should add the United Nations, were the innovations that came out of the compromises needed to win the Second World War. The withdrawal of the British from Palestine was part of the decolonization process, but as was also the case in Ireland and India, it was linked to ethnic partition that left a lasting bloody legacy, in particular in Palestine. As so many of the previous speakers have stressed, this involved the denial of self-determination for the Palestinians, as well as repression, war, and occupation, and now genocide. Ideas about human rights, crimes against humanity, or genocide also emerged during that period, but the subsequent Cold War and the rise of the return of geopolitics, the geopolitical mindset constrained their realization. Now, the Cold War ended not just because of its own contradictions, but more importantly, as a consequence of a worldwide movement for democratization that led to the end of military regimes in Southern Europe, Latin America, and Asia, the end of apartheid in South Africa, and the 1989 revolutions in Europe. These movements were global, not only in the sense that they were everywhere, but because they were able to use transnational links to leverage human rights legislation. For instance, the 1975 Helsinki Agreement in Europe. The legacy of those movements was a new post-Cold War discourse about peace, human rights, humanitarianism, and civil society, as well as new institutions, the peace and humanitarian machinery of the UN and other multilateral institutions, the OSCE, the EU, the AU, or the International Criminal Court, among others, as well as the dramatic growth of international NGOs. Alas, that discourse, sometimes referred to as the liberal peace, for all its shortcomings, and there were shortcomings, was blown off course both by the renewed militarism of the United States, Russia, China, and other powers, and by the associated spread of free market fundamentalism. Neoliberalism led to the rise of new oligarchic classes who benefited from privatization and contracting out, as well as growing inequality, and who are inextricably linked to the rise of the authoritarian populist right, and I would add the undermining of the UN and the way it's supposed to function in these situations. It's their political resistance to any form of action that might address our current ills, and their apparent influence over the public political centre ground that gives rise to the morbid symptoms that Gramsci talked about. Indeed, they tend to favour those experiments that come out of the far-right movements and make things worse. Yet, turn to an enhancement of those post-Cold War concepts is a precondition for exiting the experimental juncture, for bringing an end to the current turbulence. Of course, it might never happen. There's a risk of renewed hegemonic warfare that would inevitably lead to human extinction, or more likely, the current spread of intractable political and criminal violence in which armed groups, criminal gangs, ethnic warlords, as well as oligarchic regimes like Israel, benefit from violence, both economically and in terms of mobilizing extremist ideologies. And that could continue in time and space. But if there is to be a way out, then the Gaza movement, including the actions of the ICC and the ICJ, the way that groups and institutions have cooperated to document the crimes being committed, and the impact on global public opinion, will have played a key role in normalizing the kind of principles which will be required to underpin a new, more human-centered phase of history and provide the basis for more constructive experimentation. Thank you.